All right, hope everybody's doing good. We're back with another edition of KC Music Talk. Today I have a pianist, organist, and band leader here in town, Ken Lovern. How you doing?
Good to see you, Howard.
Yep, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you and I haven't talked a ton, but I've seen you play at Green Lady a couple times, and your band's really good, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
We have a good time playing music. So.
Yeah, I'm always blown away at a lot of your guys' bands. I mean, Chris, Hazelton's band would be in the same category of you guys always find really good other musicians to play with.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's I think, as a band leader or a band member, the quality of the people you play with is huge, and and finding people that you have similar aesthetics, you're able to get along with them and have fun, and that's and I'm always trying to play with the best people I can.
Sure.
And I feel blessed that the people I get to play with. I feel lucky every time I do a gig. I was like, these musicians are great, and so I'm always very happy to get to play with the musicians I get to play with here in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. We have a crap load of them. There's a lot of good players, especially in kind of the jazz scene. I mean, there's 100 guys out there, in
Right.
various instruments that are just killer.
Right.
It cracks me up every time I go down to Green Lady or the Blue Room or where it's just cracking me up how many people are here in town. So I have definitely a bunch of questions about your band, but tell everybody that don't know you a little bit how you got started playing or whatever.
Well, I took piano lessons as a kid, and I started playing in bands pretty young. I did have my first piano teacher was actually a very good teacher, Elsie Ellis. She had been a public school teacher, but I found one of my old notebooks from like when I was 9 years old or whatever, and she had me playing major scales around the key circle. She had me doing some things that I'd later do with John Elliott when I took lessons from him. And so I wish I'd focused on those lessons more, because I was busy playing football or building tree houses or whatever I did as a 9-year-old boy. But I had a good foundation from her. And then didn't take lessons when we moved back to Kansas City. That had been in Pittsburgh, Kansas. But I started playing in bands at a young age in junior high, like in 8th grade.
Yeah, wow.
And so in some ways I was kind of self-taught at that point, because I just learned stuff off of records, or we'd get sheet music, or somebody go to a guitar lesson and his teacher would show him the chords, and then I'd learn them from that. But I started playing in bands at a young age, and then played in the jazz band at Shawnee Mission West.
I went to South myself.
And then got in with John Elliott, who's a great jazz piano teacher and theory teacher here in Kansas City. And started taking with him. I was like a senior in high school. And then I went to Jensen County Community College, played in the jazz band out there. Got a music scholarship to go out there. So from a pretty young age, I was interested in playing in bands. And was able to do so. And I was playing gigs. I was 18, 19. I was playing jazz gigs, and I was so green. I was so green at the old City Light, which was at 75th and Warnell. And like City Light Orchestra was there. Horace Washington was there with Tyrone Clark on bass, Scooter Powell on drums, and Alan Monroe.
Yeah,
they
I know
played.
Alan, yeah.
They played there, I think, 1 or 2 nights a week, or however we do it back then. It might be we'd play like a 3 or 4 night run. But I was young and playing those gigs, And so, and then back then I played in rock bands, and jam bands, all kind of bands in my college years and even beyond. But from a pretty young age, there were jazz gigs available in Kansas City that I was doing. So that got me, and it seemed like the jazz gigs often paid better than a lot of the other gigs I do. The rock gigs, sometimes they'd pay great. If it was a door gig, we'd make a bunch of money, or other times you wouldn't make hardly anything. The jazz gigs were more consistent.
Yeah.
And I learned that from a young age. If I wanted to make a living playing music, the jazz gigs tend to support that more than some of the other gigs I was doing.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I think it's interesting when you're talking about that you got some training, but you also had this huge time where you were sort of kind of on your own, it sounded like learning wise. And I mean, that probably affected you quite a bit, because a lot of times in classical, we never get the on our own part, and it's all just structure, and like and then some other guys get the opposite, where it's always been on their own and they've never had any real training on theory and that kind of stuff. I mean, do you think that that's a good framework for people to get a little bit of help, but then kind of sort of force them on their own a little bit? Do you think that could be helpful?
Wait. In the end, you have to turn the final trick yourself, right? I mean, no matter who your teachers are, what you're studying, you know, it becomes the student's responsibility to learn. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more help you can get, the better, you know. Mm-hmm. And I wish I'd been more serious about lessons when I was younger, mm-hmm. and more serious about practicing when I was younger. But everybody's got their own journey. But there does seem to be, you know, like you mentioned, the classical thing, and Western art music, where, you know, every note's written, you know, and there's the interpretation of it, but then you get more, you know, the American approach, the jazz approach is very improvisation based, and there's certainly a lot of music, Indian music, and lots of music that are very improvisation based. But in my experience, it came more from the jazz end or thing, or jam bands, mm-hmm. and, you know, where very little is written, if anything is written. I have worked with adult students who came up playing, you know, every note was written, and then some of these people are retired. And even they can learn, you know, to play with, you know, and improvise. Yeah. And so I think it's a very learnable skill, but you just have to, you know, at some point do it. So I guess the answer is, get with as many teachers, you know, I recommend getting with the best teachers you can, and try several different teachers, you know. But then, in the end, it's all about practice.
Right. You know, the same teacher your whole life is probably actually not a good idea, huh? You know, you want to hear...
They'd have to be exactly the right teacher for that to be a good idea, right? You have to get lucky, find a good one at first. But I think, you know, everybody's got to find their own voice in the end. Mm. You know, I mean, that's, I think, ideally as a musician, you find your own voice.
Yeah, sure. So moving to kind of organ, organ always cracks me up. Like, I'm a big Medeski Martin and Wood fan, so I'm, you know, watching him. And so first of all, because I know there's a couple of different kinds of organs, like, and somebody, I think we were at the Kansas City Community College camp, and Everett was up there, you know, and they had the thing open, and it was like this spinning air thing. Like, I was just like blown away because I'd never seen one open before. Like, can you explain like how the organ sort of works, or like what's going on there?
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like what you were talking about was the Leslie speaker, mm-hmm. which spins, and, you know, rock bands tend to turn those to where you can see the spinning, which is actually the back of the cabinet is where you can generally see it. And the backs are actually usually removed, which allows a little more high end to come out of the back end of the cabinet, and people will mic that. And so you can see the top horn is spinning, and it looks like two horns, you know.
Right.
Only one of them is producing sound. The other one's there for a counterweight, which I didn't learn that until I've been playing organ for 10 years or something. And that was when Don Leslie, who invented the Leslie speaker, so the Hammond organ came out in the mid-30s, and it was supposed to reproduce the sound of a church organ, roughly, you know, an electric version of the church organ. And one of the initial knocks on it was just too pure. You know, the sine waves were just too pure, and a real church organ, you know, some of the notes would be slightly out of tune, or you also had the pipes spread all out throughout the church. And so Don Leslie's idea was to spin the speaker in order to spread the sound out. Mm-hmm. And he started off with like a bunch of speakers, like 8 speakers that were spinning. And he tested it and started disconnecting them until he got down to one. Mm-hmm. And that was what he thought was best. So the high end is actually one horn, you know, driver putting sound through one hole. There's then also a bass speaker, which is usually a 15 pointed down, kind of like a folded horn cabinet. And then there's a scoop that spins down there, like a big scoop, like that they call the drum, which spins. So that creates the low end. And so what you've got is both amplitude modulation, meaning volume, and pitch modulation. Mm-hmm. using the Doppler effect. Like when a train comes at you, you hear the pitch go up, and then as the train's coming towards you, and then go down as it leaves you. Right, that's the Doppler effect. As the pitch varies depending on what the source of the sound moving. So that's what's happening. When the Leslie's spinning, the Doppler effect is creating a slight pitch modulation.
Oh, weird.
And so that's what's going on with the Leslie speaker.
Oh, crazy.
And those are the spinning things. It's also, mostly they're tube amps. There are solid state Leslies, but most of the classic ones are tube amps. And so there's that nice warm tube, you know, like John Medeski always has the thing cranked.
Right.
There's usually his sound has a fair amount of distortion in it.
Right.
And part of that is just the Leslie's turned up all the way or nearly all the
okay.
way. So that's the Leslie speaker. The Hammond organ itself uses spinning metal wheels to generate sound called tone wheels. And the history of that is that Lawrence Hammond had a patent for a clock, the synchronous motor of a clock. So in the early part of the 20th century, clocks would, people were winding clocks, and they had gotten good, but they would still have problems with, you had to wind it, oh, I forgot to wind it, now what time is it? And so he invented this electric clock that would sync to the cycles of the alternating current, which in Chicago at the time was actually 50 cycles instead of 60 cycles, but it syncs to that. It's called a synchronous motor because it syncs to the cycles of the alternating current going back and forth between positive and negative.
Oh.
So that's the motor that runs a Hammond organ, actually tunes to the 60 cycles in that alternating current. So if you hook one up to a generator, the pitch will move because generators don't hit 60 cycles consistently.
Oh, that's weird.
So a lot of information here, but
Yeah.
so there's all these spinning wheels, 90 of them in the tone generator of a Hammond organ, and there's little notches on the wheels, and then the notches go by an electromagnetic pickup. And the number of notches in the wheel and the frequency at which they go by the electromagnetic pickup determines the pitch that's generated by that tone wheel. So there's like 90 tone wheels that are generating these pitches all the time, and then when you play the keys, it takes the sound from those pitches and passes them through.
Wow.
So it's called an electromechanical instrument in that it's electric, but it's also mechanical, and there's all these moving wheels. There's also a tube preamp in the classic preamp model of a Hammond organ. So it's got a tube preamp and a tube amp. And so by adjusting that tube preamp, you can also get more or less distortion.
Oh, crazy.
And adjust the tone.
Okay, and then so with somebody like Medeski, where you have all these, what are the things that you're pulling in and out?
Drawbars.
Drawbars. So I was watching a solo, and he's just, and then, the whole time he's just pulling in and out, and it what in general, what is all that crap? What is he doing with those?
That conversation would better be had, at the console of the organ.
Right.
Because you can demonstrate what's happening. But in terms of just describing it, it's a harmonic series. There's an 8-foot drawbar, which is basically middle C is the fundamental. Mm-hmm. There's one an octave below it. There's one a fifth above it. So you can play a major scale by playing the same 4 notes. Mm-hmm. And then you play the same 4 notes again and move the drawbar and get that.
Oh, crazy.
Use the fifth.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's interesting because when he's doing all that, it sounds more like tone and then pitch. You know what I mean? When he's pulling those out, it sounds like you can go, not a church organ, but the church to a jazz organ, mm-hmm. or making it more open or closed sound.
Right. Well, essentially, it's the harmonic series. You've got thirds and fifths and octaves are basically what's available. And so the more drawbars you pull out, the brighter the tone gets, right? You get higher harmonics. And so that makes the tone brighter. But you're actually also can shift the notes. And I did an organ rental at the Jayhawk Music Festival in 1997, 98. And ran an organ to Medeski and got to talk to him a little bit, and he was actually showing me that trick of doing the except you only play the same 4 notes and just shift the drawbars.
That's weird.
And so he spent a lot of time when he's moving those drawbars. He knows how the sound's going to change. Like an electronic solfege, I guess. He knows what sound's changing because and I was like, well, that's quite a discipline. He goes, oh, it's just a kid's game. He goes, I'm just playing with it. And he's got that great artist mentality of. It's just all play.
Yeah, sure. But after a while, I mean, you're gonna kind of, because I mean, there's like 60 of them there, or 30 of them or something.
There's
on the one
4
I
sets
saw.
of 9.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, there's 4 sets of 9, and so.
So you'd get to memorize. I mean, playing on it for 4 years, you'd memorize all the,
Yeah, and depending on how you use it and how much you adjust those things, it becomes very intuitive.
Yeah.
And there's percussion controls and other controls you can use to change some vibrato on or off. But that, it's a very expressive instrument. You can go from a whisper to a scream to get it to gush.
Right.
Yeah. And you're right. While you're changing the harmonic and in some ways the pitch, it does in a lot of ways just come off as a difference in tone. It's either darker or brighter. Right. And the more, there's that thing of the saying, pull out all the stops. That's 9 drawbars all the way out, volume pedal all the way down.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought about that phrase being on organ. That's funny. So like with organ, the one thing that it always cracks me up about a lot of instruments, like for example, when I listen to like a mandolin, it plays and then there's no sustain there, and then you go listen to an electric guitar and it's just wow, and it's just going. Hendrix or something, would do something like that, Jimi Hendrix, and then for us on violin, you can just sit there and if you can keep the strength in there, you can keep going, and then a horn, they'll you just gotta keep that sustain. But on organ, it always cracks me up because you can because you guys always have that trick of, you're going through your solo and you got maybe 3 rounds or 2 rounds eventually, and you go, and then finally you hit hold that huge sustain and you're doing other stuff with it, but there's this just huge presence there, and it just always cracks me up, the differences there of how sustain works on, because piano's not going to do that. Piano's eventually going to
decays pretty quickly.
That just cracks me up, and you guys get pretty good on when to hold out that sustain musically, and to know if I do that at the beginning of my solo, it may not work that good, but you go, and then the epicness, boom, and you hit this. I don't know, that always cracked me up. I don't know if you're fascinated by that, but like...
Well, so I came up playing more piano as a kid. And I had played, one of my first electronic keyboards was a Yamaha Electone organ. So I had organs at a young age playing in bands. But, was still, more of a pianist. So when I really started playing organ more... which was about 1997. I was, almost 30 when I bought a Hammond organ. You're exactly right. That's one of the main differences is the sustain, the infinite sustain. And when I was at UMKC, I was there, and they didn't really have a jazz studies program. So I played in jazz band, played in combo, but those didn't count as performing ensembles at the time. So I had to sing in choir, right? Which bothered me because there's sort of this anti-jazz bias.
Yeah, sure.
But I have to say, singing in choir was so good for me. And not that I became a great singer, but I learned so much because it's something I'd never done before. And one of the things in choir is, and you know this as violinists or horn players certainly are very aware of this, is where's your note ending? Where's the end of, you can rush a whole note, right? You can rush the whole note by...
Definitely rush a whole note.
Right, by rushing the end of it, And so organs like that, you got to be super aware of the end of the notes. Make sure the end of the notes...
Clean.
And it's much more important than as a pianist. And when I teach organ lessons to pianists who are learning how to play organ, and I've had some of those lately, that's always a big thing, is listen to the end of your notes. And so that's one of the things about the infinite sustain of the organ is you have to be aware of the end of the notes and how that's happening musically, and think maybe more like a horn player than a pianist necessarily would. But yeah, it does give you a lot of power in terms of you can sustain those notes forever and build a lot of energy. But yeah, you have to be somewhat judicious about the use of that, like you were saying, save that for some, or use it in ways that you're not overusing it. But yeah, that's
maybe not every solo, right? Because it's one of your tools or one of your tricks, right?
Right.
So with, like, for improv, for example, is there anything that you're because my problem is I think too much, so I'm always thinking out my solo, and that kind of gets me in trouble sometimes because there's some moments when I cannot enjoy it. I'm thinking it out and going, okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, start a second round. Okay, I'm gonna go up, and I'm just like, I keep talking about trying to stay 3 chess moves ahead in the song. Is there anything that you're thinking about while you're improvising, or are you just kind of going, or is
as little as possible? I want as little thought as possible, and I've certainly have had too much of this, too much, whether it's critical or whatever voice, too much self-talk.
Sure.
And I think for me, that's anti-musical. If I'm hearing too much talk, I'm not listening to what the other members of the band are doing. I'm not maybe listening to myself as well as how it. And so for me, I want to practice. I want to know what's going on, know the changes, know the song. I tend to not read charts at all. I mean, I can read music, and I certainly, if I do somebody else's gig, I'll read their charts. But on my bands, I memorize everything, partly because my eyes are going, but also because it helps me just be present for the music, to be present for what's happening in the moment. And so I try to think as little as possible. That said, a lot of the things you're talking about are sure, I'll try and start small or start with an idea that I state, slowly. I'll state it in quarter notes or half notes. And then, okay, I'll double that idea up.
Right.
Okay, and now I'm going to move it around. So I do conceive of things like that, but I think the less I'm actually thinking about words in my head, the better.
Yeah.
My best experiences playing music are when I'm not the one doing it. It's just passing through me.
Yeah.
And that's always that's where I want to be. I want to be in that place where music is just flowing through me, and I'm almost not even the one doing it.
Yeah.
And that's and so that's where I want to be. I'm always, how often do I get there? On a good night, maybe 20%.
Right.
On a great night, maybe 25%.
Yeah, that's the ideal.
On a bad night, maybe hardly at all.
I think Keith Jarrett kind of talks a little bit about that, because everybody talks about him going into this like trance thing, where he's not doing the self-talk. And I mean, because I'm not really meaning that I'm saying a lot of words, because it's way too fast, right? I mean, you're going through the song, you can't be saying words, so I guess that's not exactly what I mean, but I could probably do a little bit better at that, I would say, just self-critical of myself and thinking too much and saying stuff and not just kind of letting it flow. And it's hard though, like you said, it's hard to get that 100% of the time, huh?
Right. Yeah. And I think, the more that I can find that space, the closer I am to it all the time. There's also that thing of, I'll have that place where I'm not the one doing it. Everything's going great. It's amazing. I feel like I'm in this great place. And then, what song are we playing? I'll get to where I'm so detached that I've got to bring myself back. I've got to get more conscious mind. And so, but I do think, that state of, as an improvising musician, and I think it's true for interpreting musicians too, or interpreting written music they know. You want to be consciously aware and consciously present. You want to be present, but not in your head.
Yeah.
And there's that book, The Inner Game of Tennis. That a lot of people
I've
read. And that's a really good description of it. And he talks about how hey, if you're playing tennis and you have to think, oh, it's the shot's to my left, I got to go over here. It's to backhand. It's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. And so you have to train all those things.
The muscle memory,
train all those things so you're not consciously thinking about them, but you are present. I find sometimes if I'll just focus on something, like focus on the ride cymbal, I'll just listen to the ride cymbal, listen to the hi-hat. Sometimes if I do those things, or listen to the release of my bass notes, I'm often thinking about, how's the bass feel? Where's the release of the bass notes? If I focus on an element of the playing, it tends to put me present in the music, and maybe eliminate any kind of negative self-talk or anything I do.
Right.
So that I think that's a good thing for musicians who are improvisers to help get themselves present. I always think it's interesting to ask people about this, because I think some people consciously work on it. Other people, it's almost unconscious. They're not really even conscious of that process. And for some of them, it's working great, and for some of them, some better than others.
Yeah.
But not everybody consciously works on that, I've learned.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, I agree. You've got to, that's how I kind of look at it is now, the technique of the stuff, from 30 whatever years of playing, I'm not thinking about my notes, right? I mean, and my bow grip and all, I mean, that stuff's just like, that's breathing now, and so I feel like what I could do is think about all the stuff I just mentioned, and so, but yeah, I could kind of work on that a little bit of trying to just listen more and just kind of do it because muscle memory and technique wise I don't have to, because this is what you see at jams all the time is that the guitar player and he's sitting here and he's just staring at his chords all the day, and well, that's because he's finding it. It's like he doesn't know where his G sharp 9 is, so he's like, oh wait, hold on, and it's just going too fast to be like that, right? You got to know where all your notes are and the facility and all that. But with your what was I gonna? Oh yeah, talk to me a little bit about the left hand bass kind of stuff, because I know there's a lot of keyboardists that aren't very good at that. I know Chris is pretty good at that. Mark Lowry's getting pretty good at that. Because a lot of guys are playing up. They're playing up on the keyboard for good reason, because if they go too far down, they're just battling with this bass player the whole time. And did that take you a while to get the walking bass on your left hand, or is that hard, or is it like, talk about that?
Well, I was playing organ, a little bit. I was living in Lawrence at the time in a band with John Lomas and a drummer, Rick Bruner, and we had a bass player we'd done, a couple of gigs, I think, and then the bass player couldn't make a rehearsal. And so we did a rehearsal without him. And John Loman's the guitar player, goes, we're a trio now.
Yeah. Damn.
And so that's how I started playing organ and bass. And I mean,
just chopped him.
And the bass player was working. He was too busy so that it didn't bother him. But it was I had started messing around with organ bass as soon as I got an organ. I knew it was kind of a thing, but I wasn't that aware of it. And so I was immediately thrown into, and that band was called B Groove. I was immediately thrown into playing bass. And the couple things about it, one was I found it immediately made me present in the music, because I had to be very present to where's the quarter note. You know? As a pianist, a lot of times you've given that over to the bass player and the drummer. And you're kind of riding on top of it. And you can do some things to influence time. You can certainly lock into the time, but you're not primarily responsible for stating the time like a bass player is. And I found that made me very present, which is always what I want to be. I want to be present in the music. And so it put me right in the moment. And so it just immediately attracted me. I became very enamored with playing.
So it was more of a rhythmic thing than a chordal thing necessarily, it
sounds
like.
Yeah, and for me, I had played a fair amount, some solo piano gigs, and I had studied bass lines with John Elliott, and then on my own. I was aware of keyboard players playing bass, but I hadn't done a lot of it until I started playing organ. And other than just like solo piano gigs or maybe working with a singer in a duo. And so I had the harmonic awareness of bass lines, and I could hear what bass players would play harmonically, but certainly the rhythmic aspect of it was all new to me.
Yeah.
And it's the feel, just being in the center of the time, or you rushing or you dragging, or how's that feel? And then the release of the notes to me is a big deal. Now, organ is very different from other keyboards in that you've also got the pedals.
Oh, right.
And so an organ jazz is its own thing, and to articulate the bass lines in the best possible way in organ, you use the bass pedals and the left hand together. Yeah. And I've worked a lot on getting the pedals so I can double all the bass lines.
Right. You're sitting there like this the whole gig. Yeah,
I can double most of everything I play. If it gets real up tempo, I might start just playing on 2 and 4, or you can just tap one pedal to get the attack. And really, the bass pedals have a little bit different tone than the lower manual of the organ. I believe there's like almost more of a sawtooth wave where the organ's basically sine waves. The Hammond organ is basically, it's all sine waves. The bass pedal has more of a sawtooth wave tone. Some of the tones that feed that are a little different. So you get a little bit punchier low end, louder as I perceive it. What the organ jazz thing is you just tap the pedal briefly and then sustain it in your left hand, and that gives you the attack, like the plectrum effect of picking a string or plucking a string. And so that's the organ thing, and you can get it by just tapping one pedal and playing the bass line in your left hand. But you got to be quick. It's just got to be a very quick tap. But to really articulate the best bass lines, the best way, you're doubling it, and then you can sustain the notes longer. Like I tend to sustain 2 and 4 longer on a swing tune to give that a little more drive. But there's different ways to articulate the bass lines.
Yeah, sure.
And I was probably playing organ for 2 or 3 years before I even really reoriented and realized that being a bass player was now my most important job. An organ player.
You're just a trio, so you're not going to usually have a guitar, right?
Yeah, it's usually guitar, organ, and drums.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you have an extra person doing chords there too,
right?
Right. Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
So you're and a jazz organist without a bass player, their primary job, really, I think, is to be the bass player. If that's not happening, good luck with anything else, right? That's got to be right. And so it took me several years to even kind of reorient, because I'd been a professional musician for quite a while, at least 10 years before I started playing organ. So it was a slow process to like reorient to that's my primary job.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on the show. We don't have to get into it now, but the kind of role of each person in the band is really interesting. And I've said this before, that I always thought kind of the drums were the center, but I heard Dave Holland talk on this Bitches Brew video. He's like, no, he's like, bass is the center, the drum. And then they went over to Jack DeJohnette, and he's like, yeah, I'm not the center. It was funny to hear them talk about that, and like that your main focus, like now as that person, is kind of to be the rock a little bit, and the drums are kind of, rhythmically helping you along, and I don't know, that was really fascinating.
Well, that's an interesting conversation. I mean, I think that pulse is shared between the bass player and the drummer.
Yeah,
and different people have different, but it is sort of almost a negotiation or a conversation about where's the quarter note, how does it feel, and all that. And I work with a lot of drummers, and I'm blessed to work with a lot of great drummers. And it's every drummer is very different, and the more I've played, the more aware I've become of that and how it influences what I do and what I can do.
Yeah.
What's possible on any given gig.
Yeah. So kind of more with improv here. So when you're writing, like what's your, do you have like a goal with the song, or like because I know that, like, so for example, a lot of times I'll listen to guys, like for me, when I wrote my 2 albums, I knew that there was a little bit of accessibility that I wanted, like with my vocals and with some of the chords. But then when it came to kind of the beats that I was using, I really liked 5 and 7 and stuff. And then I also really didn't like the idea of a 3:40 song. I liked kind of longer, very similar to Fish, or like prog rock kind of stuff. And so I knew that I wanted, like, I had a goal in mind. They all ended up kind of being like that. A lot of not too crazy of chord. The chords itself weren't too nuts, and the vocals were regular kind of pop vocals. But I knew that I liked like Dream Theater and Medeski, Martin and Wood and Fish and that kind of stuff. And so I kind of wanted to do a blend of making it something resembling accessible for people, but also giving kind of the musicians something that they would like to. And do you have a motivation there, or a goal when you're writing, or does it just like come out, or do you do the beats first and the melody second, or how do you deal with your writing?
Well, it varies on different projects, but generally, most of the music I'm composing at the organ now, and it generally is just an idea comes out that I'm interested in. and if and a lot of times it'll happen when I first start playing in the morning. You know, when I first turn on the organ and I know I'm going to practice a certain song or whatever, but I'll just be playing around for a minute before I start whatever I'm going to work on that morning. And sometimes things just want to come out. And when they do, I try to honor it. You know, I try and, oh, that's an interesting idea. I like that. And I'll develop it a little bit and make a quick recording of it, you know, on my phone. Or if I have time and I've gotten the idea developed far enough, I'll turn on Pro Tools and make a quick multi-track recording of it. But it's generally just something that gets my attention that I want to hear. And most of the better compositions I've done are things that have just come to me. It's just, you know, I sit down at the organ and it comes out. I do sometimes, I'll have a certain song, you know, that I'm playing that I enjoy. Maybe it's a composition by somebody else, and I'll say, I like that kind of groove. I'm going to write a tune that has a similar groove.
Right.
You know, and sometimes I'll set out to do that.
Sure.
Where it's like, oh, you know, and I tend to write a lot of pretty complex things, lots of sections, and, you know, mixed meter. And sometimes I'll just be like, I like playing these 2-chord groove songs. I'm going to write a 2-chord groove song, and I'll set out to do that. So sometimes I'll have a goal like that. I want to write a certain type of tune, or I'll need a certain type of, you know, I want another funk tune for that gig, or I want an up-tempo swing tune for that gig, and I'll set a goal like that.
Sure.
But I think most of the best things, most of my best compositions just flow through me. Like I'm not the one writing them.
Right.
There is that thing of you get that initial inspiration, and then you've got to craft it into a finished composition.
Right.
And that doesn't always come easily. Sometimes that's more the work.
Yeah.
And then for me, a lot of times it's reining it in, because I'll start to just go all the, and I have to kind of narrow it back down so it doesn't come unplayable or too hard to get other people to play, or for me to even be able to play it sometimes. A lot of the stuff I compose, and this was happening maybe more 10 years ago, I would just write stuff at the edge of my ability to play. You know, and so unless I was constantly shedding it, I couldn't play it.
Right.
And that's great for getting better. It's maybe not the best composition technique. A lot of my compositions are essentially exercises, like I'm working on an aspect of my playing, and I'll be practicing that, and then kind of a tune will come out of it.
Yeah.
So I certainly have a chunk of tunes that are essentially just grew out of exercises. Like there's a tune I wrote called Yuma Green. It's just a bunch of 2/5s that were basically the keys that I felt like I wasn't as good in. You know, there's like three keys of 2/5s that were keys that I just, you know, wasn't as comfortable. A lot of it was the bass lines, just the bass lines weren't laying well for me in those keys. And so
see, that's interesting, because a lot of people, I think, would do the exact opposite. Oh no, I can't do this in G sharp. Screw that. G. Okay, here we go. You know, like, and they're not gonna want to push themselves. I mean, that sounds like you're like trying to get better.
Well,
as
a keyboard player, we're saddled with a historical interface. You know, the keyboard, this was not meant to be played in 12 keys. When it developed, they played in C. I mean, this, you know, that's a C instrument. If you can play a major scale by doing that, that's a C instrument. And it was meant to be played in the key of C. And fairly early on, they started playing in other keys. Some of the first keyboards, some of the black notes would actually share functions, and you'd have to turn a switch.
Oh, weird.
This would be, you know, maybe this one it would change which note it was, because you're basically only using those for certain parts of the composition or whatever. But people played in the key of C or F, G, D, you know. It wasn't until much later they started playing in all 12 keys. I mean, Bach was a big proponent of that with the well-tempered tuning system and the well-tempered clavier. He's like, no, we can play in all 12 keys. It's cool, you know. But this interface is still not really that great for playing a lot of keys. If you're playing guitar or, you know, fretboard, once you learn a scale, that scale pattern's good in every key, unless you run into the top of the, you know, or the bottom. But the piano keyboard's not like that. You know, all the keys look different, and it's ugly. So a lot of what I do with those when I'm working on those keys is you're trying to overcome that. You know, you're trying to overcome the limitations of this interface and be proficient in all those keys, even though some of the shapes are different. And so that's a lot of that is, and I think that's a lot of for many people, becoming an improvising musician or a jazz musician on keyboard is learning that our harmonic system, you know, the 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major,
Right,
5
yeah,
dominant, 6 minor, 7 half diminished major, that's true in all keys, you know, and making that at every key is as fluid as the key of C.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what I'm trying to do to play in all those keys is you have to make it as fluid in every key. As I became an accordionist, I learned about chromatic button accordion. And if you see those guys from Northern Europe or Eastern Europe, you know, Russians, Finnish, they play these chromatic button accordions where the interface is ideal. Every key is the same. You just move. You want to change keys, you just move your hand. And those guys shred on that because once they learn a pattern, it's good in every key. They don't have to learn it in 12 different patterns.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, an interesting thing about this historical interface as an improvising musician. You really have to overcome those keys being different. And I think for some musicians, it's just inherently, they just naturally do it. It doesn't bother them at all.
Right.
You know, the super talented. You know,
Yeah, that's cool.
They just immediately overcome it. For most humans, though, it takes some work to overcome that. You know?
Sure. Yeah. So kind of switching gears a little bit. So with your band, one thing that I'm always fascinated by is all of the businessy side of music. And I heard I mentioned this on our last show that I heard this guy talking about personality differences between people, and he was talking about this thing called the Big Five Aspect Scale, where you have like extroversion and orderliness and openness to ideas and agreeableness, and there's all these things. And so he was talking about different people, how a lot of times people are, and so orderly is, you know, rules and boundaries and structure and whatever, and then you have openness, which is more openness to ideas, where it's a lot of creativity and stuff. And I found with a lot of musicians that it's not rare, but you don't see it very much, where someone is like ridiculously orderly and ridiculously open. It's like super creative. You tend to have more of one or the other. And so with running a band, it seems like a lot of people a lot of guys are just not good at all this business stuff. You know, like making a website and making a flyer to put down at the bar and like talking to the club owner and we've talked about this on the show a lot because I think it's really important. And some of the guys really avoid that like the plague, and they become kind of a studio-ish guy where they're like, I do not want to run a band. Screw that. You know, I just want people to call me and I want to show up and play and I would wonder if there's, you know, a tiny bit of brattiness with that, is that this is the stuff that they just don't want to do, so they avoid it. But also, I think people are realizing that they're just not good at that. But then you have somebody like Alani McFadden, who's kind of sort of good at that, at doing the organization and wants to talk to the club owner because it's his, you know, it's his name. And like, how is that stuff like hard for you, or did you have to learn how to get good at that, of like booking, or do you like doing that stuff? Or can you talk about a little bit about the kind of the business side of your band and how that's going?
Well, I enjoy the creative music side the most.
Sure.
I don't mind doing a lot of the other stuff.
All right.
But to me, being able to do some of the other stuff allows you to do the creative stuff. You know, being able to take care of the business, being able to have gigs lined up, and being able to make recordings, you know, and sell recordings, you know, have a web presence. All that stuff enables the creative stuff. And, you know, as a creative artist, rarely is anybody else going to do as good a job as you'll do on your stuff as you will, because you're motivated, right? I mean, unless you've got a really good team, there's some people who believe in you or are motivated by money or whatever else might motivate them. You know, I think a lot of artists are going to be their best proponent for doing a lot of that stuff, but it's maybe unpleasant. It's not as much fun. I mean, so it's sort of a means to an end. to take care of business so you can have your band and do the band you want to do. You do kind of have to be able to take care of business, and you do have to be able to book gigs or find a way to have an outlet for your music. I did, I was a professional musician for several years. After college, I played in Ida Macbeth's band right after I got out of school, and did that for several years, and did some other gigs. And then I kind of got disenchanted with it, and went back to school, and went to law school and practiced law. I worked for a judge for 3 years, which I really enjoyed, and then practiced law for a few years. And one of the focuses of my practice was helping musicians and music-related businesses. And I enjoyed that part of it in terms of, somebody wants to do a CD project, they've got these investors, they need a contract, they need to form an LLC. Okay. And I enjoyed that part. And I really didn't have much of a business background, but with the legal background, I was able to pull enough of that together to do that. And I enjoyed that part. I didn't enjoy all the conflict that was involved. And I'd had, at the time I was practicing law, Napster had come into effect.
Right.
And
Napster was a big deal at the time.
Huge deal. People don't realize. I watched a Napster documentary a couple years ago, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that was a huge deal."
I know Lars was a big,
they were way down.
Ulrich was really not happy about that stuff.
Right. Well, and a lot of musicians and record labels weren't, and it was a very quick shift of how music was going to be delivered. And I worked for one in particular, but a couple of small record labels, Kansas City, regional record labels based in Kansas City. And within a year, almost all of those had gone out of business. That sort of regional record, it changed so much that the older ones, a lot of them just went out of business. And you just don't have, now there's just a very few major labels. And the smaller labels tend to be, very small, not making a lot of money. A lot of times they're just run by bands or a few bands that have banded together. The record label thing is very different from what it was then.
So when you were a lawyer, you were probably getting a lot of drummers out of jail. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, and I didn't really practice that much after I worked for the judge. And basically I just backslid into being. That's when I bought a Hammond organ. Was when I worked on the Kansas Court of Appeals. I bought a Hammond organ, and during that time, and I just went back to being a musician. But so I say all that, and that's a long time ago. I practiced law for over a decade, but to say that, I have done more on the business side than a lot of people, but I still tend to put it off. I have to make myself do it. Like we released a new record with OJT, New Originals for the Green Lady. We released this fall. And, I was like, my website is just woefully out of date. And like, I've got to update it. And so, it didn't really take me that long, but I have to make myself do it.
Right.
And I was motivated because we had a new record coming out. I had to, get that up there, make it look, like it's not from the 90s, And so I guess, the end of that is it really helps, I think, creatives. Taking care of the business end allows you to create. So, I kind of have to make myself do it.
Yeah. And so you're talking about a mentality of it, though, is that because that's what I think is missing with a lot of guys is they just don't, they don't like seeing it as the means to the end, like you said, is this is part of it. And I always use the analogy of like a car where, like, so you have this band, you have the car, and if you don't have the steering wheel, you're done. If it has no tires, you're done. If you have no seats, you can't sit, and like every part seems so critical. And this is one of those big parts that, all of us have kind of been in bands that had all but these two pieces, and it kind of didn't end up going anywhere. Like the music was there, the guys were really good players. It maybe was everybody was sort of getting gigs, but the guys hated each other or something. You know what I mean? Or the guys all liked each other, but you weren't really good players. Or all the musical stuff was great, but nobody booked any gigs or nobody advertised.
I've been in that,
yeah. So that always cracks me up, and so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a framework for what, because I'm always fascinated by all those guys that are like all of us that are sitting in these $300 gigs for accidentally forever. And they're just, they're going from one bar to bar, and you play 5 times here, okay, sorry, and then you go to another bar around Kansas City, around a town, and those guys that are up in those $800, $1,500 gigs in that type of a band that's really pushing, then you get up to that, next $3,500, festival kind of, and I'm trying to figure out what all these guys are doing and why they're not up, why their band has never gotten up there, and I wonder if a lot of it is the businessy stuff. Is that because how many good players are there here? It can't be that. There's 1,000 in this town.
Right, that's one element. It's one element, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be trash. I mean, you can't have started one day ago. To get a good band, it's hard. I mean, you got to have some talent there. But I wonder if it's all the extra businessy stuff is what's holding a lot of people back. I don't know.
Well, in terms of elevating your the career of any band or musician, I think one important element is being unique. How do you get more money is you're not, just a country band or just a jam band or just a jazz band. You're a unique jazz band. And the example from my life is the Doodads. We did rock and roll for kids. And there were lots of kids bands, but there was only one band that played rock and roll for kids the way we did, the Doodads. So we could charge a lot more, and we could charge whatever we wanted, because if you wanted the Doodads, you had to hire us.
Yeah, that's probably another thing, like you just said, is some, and shtick is a bad word. I don't like that word. But
I think just being unique.
Yeah.
Being unique, and of course in demand.
Yeah.
The combination of in demand and unique allows you to raise your price. But a lot of the bands you're talking about, you're talking about doing bar gigs. Mm-hmm. You're all essentially fungible units. You're replaceable. Those guys are like a rock band, play a classic rock band. Well, here's another classic rock band, right? And one might be better than the other. They might have a better song list or whatever.
But same thing. Yeah.
But to so many people, they're replaceable. But but if it's a classic rock band that has a show. Yeah. That has they do a Zeppelin set, and then they do then you've become more unique, and you've elevated what you do. Yeah. Of course, it's being unique doing original music is great, and you're of course very unique because it's your own compositions. But then there's that aspect of getting over with an audience who's never heard that music before. Mm-hmm. And so then there's a whole other set of challenges of getting your music out there, making your music accessible enough, that people will listen to it.
I always use the Kiss analogy, they've got this fire and the tongue and the costume.
It's a show.
They have this huge
it's entertaining.
Thing. Their music, this is my opinion. I think you take away all that stuff and you got kind of some average rock. That's my opinion.
Right.
But when you go to the show, everybody that comes there goes, dude, that was top 5 best shows I've ever seen, and so visually and just the energy and stuff. And so like, I wonder, so it sounds like that's probably a big component of it, the uniqueness and what your angle is, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And and your more fundamental question earlier was just, the business end, and taking care of that. And sometimes it's one member of the band, or what I was thinking about when you were talking about that earlier was, there's those guys who maybe aren't the best musicians in the band, but that's the guy that goes out and gets the gig, and we all know that band leader, and hey, I hope all my musicians in my band are better players than me. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to keep trying to be better, but if you're booking the gig, hopefully you can get guys who are really, that are better than you, or at least elevate, hopefully elevate your level of playing.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right, and that's really cool. I mean, that's kind of back to the roles of the band too. Sometimes that me and my buddy, I talk about him a lot that I play with, but he's really good on stage. He's great with the audience. About the best he's better at. Lonnie's pretty good at talking. This guy like dwarfs Lonnie. He's so good at. He's
got to be good then.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, Lonnie. That audience loves Lonnie before he plays a note.
Yeah,
he talks for whatever 30 seconds or a minute before the show starts. Right. They're already pulling for him. He hasn't even played a note yet, and they already love him.
Yeah,
and so that's a great thing.
Yeah, and so, but he's also hard to pin down a little bit too, because he's got this openness thing really hard. He's lateral all over. His ideas are just constant all day nonsense, because he's a comedian basically, so he's just got nonsense silliness going on in his head all day. But as you can tell, I'm a lot more serious than he probably is, and but that's I think why we kind of work all right together, because I am thinking about probably too much again, all about all this kind of stuff, and even on stage, I can let him think of the songs, talk to the audience, but because I don't have to play the whole time, I can kind of turn around to the band and do all the cueing, basically. I'm like the on-stage conductor, because I've conducted before and stuff, and because I'm trying to think 3 moves ahead, I'm pretty good at cueing and stuff.
You know the ending's coming, to get people's eyes. We're going to stop.
Second verse, here's the chorus, all right, bridge, now we have a solo, I got to turn to him for the second, I'm just,
right.
And so but with the role of the band, I think that's what a lot of guys are looking for, because they don't want to go do all that business stuff. And those guys like Alani are gold out here, because everybody's so bad at it, and we're all looking for those people, probably to avoid a little bit of work there, so we don't have to go advertise. But yeah, I always thought that was really important, and one of the things that especially young college kids also. We don't get a whole lot of that at college. They teach us how to play music beautifully, and we don't ever get taught how to talk to a club owner and like tell jokes to an audience in the middle of songs, and so I think a lot of people miss that,
Well, and it's hard to teach, and most people who are teaching in college don't have much experience with that. Or,
it's a problem.
There's some exceptions, and I know there are some people. I know Stan Kessler's done some business of music classes where you've got somebody who's got real world experience who's going to talk to
Bobby.
Right, Bobby Watson. He's got real world experience. He can talk to people about that stuff.
Roger's going to have that. Rod Fleeman.
Yeah, we're lucky. We're lucky here. Like all those people you mentioned are at UMKC, and Jim Merrill at KC. Kansas Community College. He played gigs for years. And so that is good, and I think that real world experience is helpful. But in the end, you got to go out and do it.
Sure.
You have to turn the final trick yourself. You got to go out and do it. But I think that is good for creative people to have control of their own career and realize that schedule some time to do that stuff that you don't like to do. Right, I have to write it down on a schedule. I'm going to do this now, because then after I do it, I feel so much better. And it wasn't really that big a deal. It's just not really in my wheelhouse. It's not my most comfortable thing. Yeah. But if it allows you to create more stuff, what to create more space for doing what you really want to do, it's important. There's the other perspective of just get really good at what you do, and the world will come to you. Yeah, and that works for some people. Right. But that doesn't work for everybody, in my experience.
Definitely the studio kind of guys, that's what they want to do. They want to get to know a ton of people, have their craft, and then they're just, waiting by their phone like the rest of their life, and people are calling them. I know, like maybe a Dominique Sanders would have been like that, where you get to know a lot of people, and then he just starts getting calls, and after a while, you don't have to go hunt for gigs. You just go to jams and meet a bunch of people, and then start getting calls, which is nice. I mean, it's a nice place to be if you're not gonna run your band, if you're just gonna get calls. But
I'm a big believer in the importance of setting an intention. If I want to accomplish something, think about exactly what it is and set that intention. What is it you want to accomplish, and you can break it down to a general thing. I want to compose more music. You can also have I want to compose more music for this record, or I want to compose a musical. Yeah. And then write down some very specific goals and work towards them. But that setting of an intention unleashes all sorts of power in the way I believe the universe works. It just, when you set an intention, the universe starts to work to create it. And so I think those things you're talking about, a lot of those come down to creative people set an intention for what you want to do and take steps towards doing it. But then the universe, if you stay with that intention, the universe will work to accomplish it, and things will come in to help. You'll meet people you've never met before. Doors will open where no doors were before, and those things will come to pass.
That's interesting that you said intention instead of goal. I kind of like that, because there's when you're talking about setting a intention, there's also ability to have a fork off of that. Right?
Yeah. This or something better is the way people
I heard a
say
guy
it.
talk about that, about setting a plan or whatever, and that's the plan. But when you have to deviate, you always have your backup plan or whatever. And that's just interesting that you said that word intention.
Well, and I think often I'll set an intention to do a certain thing, but if the specific goal doesn't happen, but the more general one does in a slightly different way, well, I'm just as happy.
Yeah.
And maybe it turns out actually being better because when I first set so I think it's good to think of them generally and specifically, and then be happy if the general one comes, is more what
writing an album is an intention, but what is in the album, who plays on the album, where that all stuff is still up for grabs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're probably wrapping up here. Do you have a gig that was really crazy that you played, or really great, or
there have been there's I'll start with this one, and maybe there'll be another one, but this may be it. So I played in this band called Cosmopolitics, a Lawrence jam band. Matt Gator's guitar player, songwriter. Luke Stone's drummer, Andy Croker's bass player, and I played keyboards at varying times in the band, and we would play at the Wakarusa Music Festival back at the Zoo in Lawrence. And we had played there, I think, a couple of years in a row, and we had a pretty good spot about 1 a.m. in one of the campground stages. So after the main stage had closed, we were in the campground stage. Well, this year, the park rangers were shutting the thing down because of time constraints. And so we had this meeting with the people running the festival, and they're like, yeah, we actually signed to say that there wouldn't be any campground music after midnight, and so you can't do your show. And of course we were crushed because we were all camping, but that was our whole reason for being out there, was to do the show. And I think this was maybe Thursday or Friday night, and so we would just become aware of it. I think they had just become aware of it.
Yeah.
And so couldn't do our show. And we're bummed out, and I think it was a 1 a.m. show, so it's getting late pretty quick. But we're like, we want to play, and we look around, and there's those big generators that run the lights, the campground lights. And I'm just like, there's an outlet there, because people are like, we can find a generator we can plug in, and I'm just like, we don't even need to find a generator. There's one right there. We just need an extension cord. And I couldn't use the Hammond organ because I couldn't plug that into a generator because the pitch will move. Yeah. Actually, I think I did play organ because I have one that converts it, so you can do it. Yeah. But anyway, so we set up in the campground and played from the sun was coming up. We played from 2 to 5.
Wow.
And I think that's probably one of the most rock and roll moments of my life, just because it was kind of a renegade show.
Right.
And it wasn't, because we didn't have a PA, it wasn't so loud we were going to attract the attention of the park police.
Right.
At least we didn't. But we got to do our show, and it was really great. The show ended when a bunch of nudists showed up, and the sun was coming up, and there was all these naked people, and it's like, okay, we're done. So that was that's probably the most rock and roll.
Yeah, but it was kind of like against them too, because they're talking about that you can't play after midnight, so you were like, yeah, screw you,
Though I'm sure they knew we were playing. And
sure,
they people figured it out, but we weren't on a stage, and there wasn't a big PA, so I don't think it created a problem. But it was kind of a renegade show.
That's fun.
But I think, and it was just so great to get to play.
At a big festival like that.
Yeah, and just we were all waiting for that show. That was our whole reason for camping that weekend. To not play the show would have been epic failure.
Sure.
So that was a pretty cool fun.
Yeah, that's fun, man. Yeah, I don't know what else I got for you, but
that's probably enough.
That's probably enough, yeah. But definitely keep up what you're doing at Green Lady and anywhere else you get to play.
Yeah,
I really enjoy your all the guys that you bring up, and definitely your arrangements and everything you're doing. Everything you're doing with your band is really great, man. Ken Lovern, thanks for coming.
Foster, thanks so much. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, no problem. But we'll be back next time with some more people talking about stuff. All right. See you guys later.